If you have a child recently diagnosed with ADHD, chances are you are sifting through a lot of the information, trying to figure out what is fact and what is fiction, because there is a lot of fake news about ADHD. I'm Miriam. I'm a licensed psychotherapist specializing in ADHD, but more importantly, I am the mom of 3 happy young adults who have successfully learned to manage their ADHD. Come with me today as we explore some of the top ADHD myths. Number 1, ADHD isn't a real medical disorder. All right, well, there's no denying that ADHD lacks biological validity. In other words, there's no blood test or identifiable genetic marker that hands down proves a person has ADHD, which can also make misdiagnosing pretty easy. There's also no objective testing with right or wrong answers. The only available testing is subjective, meaning the answers may depend a lot on whether it's you, the parent, or a teacher, or the child themselves doing the answering. But the diagnosis has what we call reliability. This means that given the observed symptoms, any 2 clinicians would diagnose the same thing. It isn't arbitrary, which is why the American Psychiatric Association is able to develop a universally accepted set of symptoms that are consistently reported and validated by clinicians worldwide. And as I mentioned in my e-course on How to Parent ADHD, insurance companies will reimburse for this diagnosis, and believe me, if it weren't a real diagnosis, do you think they'd part with their cash? It's also a condition that's helped by medication. If medication can act on the brain to improve symptoms, then it's safe to say those symptoms were caused by conditions in the brain, and therefore they are biological. Biological symptoms equals real medical disorder. Bam. Number 2, ADHD is a modern farce created by drug companies. Okay, well, I'm no lover of corporate profiteering, and whether drug companies are inherently evil or just taking enormous financial risks to develop medicine to improve people's lives is fodder for a totally different discussion. But the reality is we have historical evidence of ADHD-like symptoms reported by doctors long before drug companies existed. In the 1800s, a German doctor wrote about patients he called Fidgety Phil and Johnny Look in the Air. I won't bore you with endless examples of when ADHD showed up in old medical texts, and it certainly wasn't referred to as ADHD because it wasn't called that until the 1980s, but suffice it to say, this has been a human reality, albeit a misunderstood one, since doctors began recording information about patients. So, not invented by the evil drug companies. Number 3, it's overdiagnosed. So, there's a distinction here that may seem like semantics, but it's important. ADHD is not overdiagnosed, but it probably is misdiagnosed a lot, which is why it's so important to start with your pediatrician and then be seen by a therapist, psychologist, or psychiatrist who specializes in neurodevelopmental disorders for a thorough evaluation. As I mentioned in my e-course on How to Parent ADHD, ADHD can look a lot like depression or dyslexia, sleep apnea, or allergies. And if you only visit your pediatrician and they offer you a simple checklist questionnaire for you and your child's teacher, and you check enough boxes, well, your child is going to get that ADHD diagnosis, and that diagnosis might be wrong. You'll potentially go down a road of medicating the wrong thing, trying the wrong approach, and wind up with all of you very tired and very frustrated. So, insist with your pediatrician that they do a battery of tests, including blood tests, before jumping into the most obvious ADHD choice. And by the way, ADHD isn't the only commonly misdiagnosed condition. Doctors misdiagnose lupus, stroke, multiple sclerosis, Lyme disease, and a whole host of other things. This doesn't make any of those accurate diagnoses any less legitimate, any less impairing, or any less painful for their sufferers. And ADHD is no different. Number 3, ADHD is the result of bad parenting. Believe me, I spent years thinking I was a terrible parent because nothing I did helped my kids, and they just seemed to get worse. Struggle, and I saw how other moms looked at us. But all it meant was that I was trying a typical parenting approach on my atypical children, which wasn't working. And why wouldn't I try that typical approach first? It's how I was parented, how my friends parent, and maybe it's how you parented your older children, and it worked for all of the above. It's only natural we'd pick the same path again, but that doesn't make us inherently bad parents, so please don't take that on. The very fact that you recognize that the old path isn't working and you're here uncovering myths and truths means you can't possibly be that bad of a parent, because you're already an improving parent. You've just been on the wrong road. So while the way you parent at the moment may not be helping, it didn't cause your child's ADHD. Not a chance. That's like saying your parenting caused your child's type 1 diabetes or their dyslexia or their allergies. Your mindful parenting of those conditions could impact the healthy management of a diabetic child's food, or the needed reading tutoring for the dyslexic child, or making sure you never get a cat for the allergic one. But your great parenting won't take away diabetes, dyslexia, or allergies, and it won't take away ADHD. Your mindful parenting choices can just make it better. Alrighty, number 4. ADHD only affects boys. Nope. Those of you with girls already know that this is not true. But boys are more than twice as likely to be diagnosed than girls. This is partly because more boys have the hyperactive subtype and more girls have the inattentive subtype. We don't know why, but the inattentive subtype is easy to overlook because it generally doesn't come with the hyperactive and impulsive behavior that gets all the negative attention. The boys are the ones jumping off the monkey bars, hitting by accident, making noises during story time, while the girls are quietly in the back, staring at the walls and wondering about unicorns instead of learning math facts. Because girls are often overlooked for this diagnosis, it can lead to huge self-esteem issues for them as they go through life always thinking that they're just stupid or socially awkward for no reason. A diagnosis and treatment can lift an enormous weight. Okay, myth number 5. A kid who can play video games for hours couldn't possibly have ADHD. So I talk a little bit about this in my neuroscience module in my How to Parent ADHD e-course. ADHD is not a universal, I can't pay attention to anything at any time kind of a thing. The reason your kid can pay attention to fun things like video games, Legos, or graphic novels, and not to their homework or your chore list or their teacher's boring lecture, is because during fun things, our brain gets a lot of dopamine. Dopamine is the pleasure neurotransmitter, and we get flooded with it when we're enjoying ourselves. Dopamine is also the juice your child's prefrontal cortex isn't getting, so that it can function properly. So when they are getting flooded with dopamine while doing something pleasurable, their prefrontal cortex is getting the juice it needs, and voila, it can now pay attention. But when your child is doing something boring, no dopamine is created, no juice to the prefrontal cortex, no attention possible. Honestly, this difference alone, your kid's ability to pay attention on dopamine and not pay attention without dopamine, is great proof positive that this is a neurological condition. Myth number 6. Children with ADHD eventually outgrow their condition. Ugh, don't we all wish? But stats show that about 70% of people diagnosed as children still have it in adulthood. So, what about that other 30%? Did it just go away for them? Not likely. While hyperactive symptoms do seem to wane as children get older, in other words, your 25-year-old child won't be jumping repeatedly on the sofa or throwing Tonka trucks at his sister. The behavior is usually transferred to less obvious, more socially acceptable hyperactivity, such as constant knee bouncing or driving too fast. Others who sought treatment either medicinally, therapeutically, or through executive functioning coaching likely have integrated mindfulness and good coping skills into their lives to help them with organization, time management, emotional dysregulation, and other ADHD symptoms. So while those 30% report no longer having ADHD symptoms, it's more likely they're just managing those symptoms so seamlessly that they no longer notice the condition. Myth number 7. Children who take ADHD medication are more likely to abuse drugs. Funnily enough, it's actually the opposite. While it is true that children diagnosed with ADHD are at higher risk for drug abuse than neurotypical children, numerous studies done by reputable places like Harvard Medical School and published in the American Journal of Psychiatry concluded that children with ADHD who take appropriate medication for the condition are actually less likely to seek to self-medicate by abusing drugs later. So, ADHD meds can be a protective factor against the high risk for drug abuse our kids face. I talk more about medication in my How to Parent ADHD e-course, but rest assured, I'm not going to try to convince you either way on this topic. This is a discussion for you and your child's pediatrician or psychiatrist. Myth number 8. Special accommodations for ADHD are an unfair advantage. So are wheelchairs, handicapped parking spots, eyeglasses, crutches for people with broken legs. I mean, why should they get something special if I don't? Okay, obviously because they have a condition that I don't, and the prosthetic they're using due to their condition is not an unfair advantage. It's what levels the playing field for them so that they can move through life with the same advantages as others. I hear people gripe all the time that time and a half on testing is so unfair. Why does your kid get more time on the SATs than mine? But what they don't realize is that the normal amount of time is what's unfair to the child with ADHD because their brain just cannot get that work done without more time. Just like a seeing impaired child's brain can't get the work done without glasses. Myth number 9. People who have ADHD are stupid or lazy. You know, my experience is that this is actually quite the opposite. People with ADHD have to naturally try twice as hard just to get the same amount of work done as a neurotypical person. It's exhausting. And sure, if a child has been told repeatedly that he's messing up, he might eventually give up trying. So there is that. But people with ADHD have to be out of the box, resilient, creative problem solvers to get through projects, work, and just plain old day-to-day life. I'd hire someone who is actively and mindfully treating their ADHD for any job because I'd know I was getting someone used to working hard and solving problems. And finally, my fave, myth number 10, French kids don't have it. Okay, look, I've lived in France and I have French friends. Believe me, French kids have it. What's more likely happening is that these poor kids are just undiagnosed, seen as screw-ups because they fly in the face of their authoritative parents. The fact is, worldwide reported rates of ADHD are consistent. It exists no more or less in any country, thereby further proving that it is a neurologically, physically informed disorder and not just a question of bad behavior or lazy parenting. I hope this video has been helpful. For more tips or tricks on how to parent ADHD, please be sure to check out my e-course in the comments below. Happy parenting!